Support for NPR comes from this station and from Capital One, committed to reimagining banking, offering savings and checking accounts that can be opened from anywhere. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Capital One, N.A. And from Home Advisor, committed to helping homeowners find the right pro for their home projects. Homeowners can get matched to local pros, read reviews, and check project cost guides at homeadvisor.com.
Who's firing all these buttons?
Worldview with Jerome McDonald is next, live from Dearborn, Michigan, and WBEZ is supported by Steppenwolf Theater, presenting Sam Shepard's True West. This is Steppenwolf's first revival, featuring a new generation of artists taking on Sam Shepard's classic. Tickets at steppenwolf.org.
The following is a public service announcement provided by WBEZ. The 20th Annual Midwest Harp Festival begins this coming Monday, July 15th in Palos Heights. It's a week-long event with more than 30 harpists from around the Midwest and a number of free concerts. That's in the Ozinga Chapel Auditorium of Trinity Christian College in Palos Heights. More information at midwestharpfestival.org/concerts. This is 91.5 WBEZ.
With the 2020 election approaching, Morning Edition shows you the view from here, there, and everywhere. We take you across the country to explore different issues and understand the voices behind the votes.
I'm Brian Baxt in St. Paul.
Kelsey Snell, NPR News, Crew, Virginia.
I'm Josh Rogers in Concord.
Mara Eliason, NPR News, Washington.
Travel somewhere new with Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tomorrow, between 5 and 9 a.m. on WBEZ 91.5, Chicago's NPR news station.
The new White House press secretary Stephanie Grisham is known for working well with reporters and hitting back hard in defense of her bosses. That story on the next All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 3 on WBEZ.
Hello, everyone out there in Facebook land. I'm at the Islamic Center of America. My name's Jerome McDonald. I'm with WBEZ Radio, and we're doing a broadcast today from the Islamic Center of America, and it's going to be terrific. It's going to start in 5 minutes, and we hope you'll stay tuned. It'll run for about 45 minutes or so when we're live on the air, and I hope you enjoy us. We're going to have the imam here. We're going to have an exhibit about Halal Metropolis with us, and we're going to be talking about Henry Ford and the stir-up over the anti-Semitism. So hope you can stay with us and join us here on Facebook.
Hashtag WVBus. A lot ahead. Next on Worldview, the 25th anniversary road trip live from Dearborn, Michigan. Right after the latest news live from the BBC and from the WBEZ newsroom on WBEZ HD Chicago 91.5 FM, WBEQ HD Morris 90.7 FM, WBEK Kankakee 91.1 FM, and always on your smart speaker.
This is the BBC News. Hello, I'm Jonathan Izard. The British ambassador to the United States has resigned after his confidential criticism of President Trump's administration was leaked. Sir Kim Darroch said it was impossible for him to carry out his role as he would like, after Mr. Trump said he would no longer deal with a person he called a very stupid and pompous fool.
Hi, Alex.
And Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt said he was dismayed by what
Alex?
Sir Kim.
Hey, it's Steve. Just checking in.
Black day for British diplomacy.
How you doing?
Sir Kim Darroch is absolutely
good. Okay, so
shocked and actually very angry.
You know the drill. 106, play the music, in and out. Let me give you my number. Do you want me to call and have you on speakerphone on the 4739?
Foreign Secretary will.
I'm on it with Julian.
Okay, that's fine. All right.
Just to tell me their unvarnished opinions about
okay, great.
Well, is it better that I hang up with Julian and call you?
No. You're right, Julian. It's better to be on with
China
him.
to halt its mass detention of ethnic Muslims.
Thanks a lot.
In the far western region of Xinjiang. Imogen Folks reports.
The UN Human Rights Council tends to approach China with caution. No one really wants to offend such an economic power. But this letter, signed by almost half the council members, among them Britain, France, Germany and Australia, is blunt. It expresses concern at reports of mass detention and widespread surveillance and restrictions targeting the Uyghur
Hi, Christine,
community.
Jerome.
Hi, Jerome.
But the letter is not a formal resolution.
What's the best way to introduce you? What title should I use?
Still, China,
Dr. Christine Ajrush,
just vocational centers.
Teaches at
Professor of Sociology,
is reportedly very angry.
I have actually a few titles. Professor.
I know, that's why I'm asking.
Okay. Professor of Sociology at Eastern Michigan University and also adjunct research professor at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan.
On Twitter, Mr. Trump also also accused Tehran of having secretly enriched uranium for a long time.
That's a long one.
Iran's ambassador to the IAEA refuted the allegation, as Bethany Bell reports.
The Iranian ambassador, Kazim Garib Abadi, said Iran had nothing to hide. He said Iran's recent actions were permitted under the deal to restore what he called balance in response to U.S. non-compliance. A U.S. statement to the IAEA said Iran's breaches of its nuclear deal were an attempt to extort payments from the international community. The three European parties to the deal, France, Britain and Germany, called on Iran to reverse its actions and avoid any steps which would undermine the accord.
Ukraine's president has signed a decree to transform the area around the Chernobyl nuclear reactor into a tourist site. Volodymyr Zelensky said he wanted to bring new life to an area of Ukraine forever associated with the world's worst peacetime nuclear disaster. Ownership of the dome that encloses the reactor has been transferred to Ukraine. World News from the BBC.
It is sunny and hot, 90 degrees. Feels like 97 degrees at 12:04. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Garber with headlines from WBEZ News. The city of Chicago has temporarily halted the installation of water meters after tests showed elevated lead levels after work was done. Despite the action, Mayor Lori Lightfoot insisted yesterday that the city's drinking water is safe. Officials say of the 510 homes being tested by the city, 36 of them show lead levels higher than the 15 parts per billion guidelines set by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. There are 135,000 buildings and 179,000 residences with water meters. Democratic presidential hopeful Jay Inslee says he opposes a plan to build an oil pipeline tunnel beneath the channel that links Lakes Huron and Michigan. Washington State Governor told the Associated Press today that Enbridge's existing Line 5 pipes and its proposal to replace them with a tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac are clear and present danger to the Great Lakes. He says the pipeline should be a major issue during the Democratic primary campaign. The consulting firm called Accenture has proposed some jobs for the city of Chicago, and it is going to plan a big expansion. Cranes reports that the company will add about 600 jobs, and Accenture will consolidate multiple Chicago offices at its location at 500 West Madison Street. Accenture executives, Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Lori Lightfoot, are scheduled to announce the expansion today. Accenture is a spin-off from the old Arthur Andersen accounting firm. A passing shower is possible, mainly between 3 and 7 today, otherwise mostly sunny, very hot and humid with a high near 91, but could feel as hot as 97. Partly cloudy and breezy tonight, a low around 69, and not quite as hot tomorrow, partly sunny with a high near 80. It's sunny now, 89 degrees, feels like 96 at 12:06.
Welcome to Worldview from WBEZ. I'm Jerome McDonnell. We've taken Worldview on the road this week. We've been in London, Ontario, and Flint, Michigan. You can follow the trip at wbez.org/WVBus or on social media. You can use the hashtag WVBus. And today I'm in Dearborn, Michigan. Dearborn is known for having the largest concentration of Muslims in North America, and we are at the Islamic Center of America. It's the largest mosque in North America. In this hour, we're going to get to know Dearborn and Dearborn's Muslim population a little better. And with me first is Sheikh Dr. Ibrahim Kazarouni. He is Imam for the Islamic Center of America. Thanks. Yay!
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for hosting us. And this is a beautiful mosque and school you have here and a great community. Everything I see is terrific.
Thank you for being here. I speak on behalf of everyone at the center, the board, and everybody else to welcome you here. It's a pleasure to meeting everyone.
Can you tell us a little about the evolution of the center? I mean, when you become the biggest mosque in North America, there's got to be a story behind that.
How much time do I have? Because the reason why I ask for how much time, it's a long story. It goes back to 1945-46 and even before, because the Lebanese community that came and became the cornerstone of this center and the previous center, they immigrated to United States, some of them even the late 19th century, before the 20th century. Around 1946, there was a dire need for a religious scholar to be brought in, and they invited the founder of the Islamic Center, Sheikh Muhammad Jawad Sherry, which I believe as you go around the center, you see his image, few images of him.
I've seen it several times.
Yes, God bless his soul. And over many years of hard work, and I mean hard work, when you read the story behind what he did, and finally he managed to travel around with the help of the community to start the foundation of what used to be known the only Islamic center for the Shia community or Lebanese community on Joy Road, which I believe the building is still there, but at the moment the Iraqi community primarily use it. And around 1990, 1994, they began to notice that that building was not sufficient and adequate for the community. A plan was organized to move to a different place, and this new building, the land was purchased, built, and ultimately around, I think, 2004, 2005 was the opening of this Islamic Center.
I've got to say, it's an interesting place here. This is called Altar Row. You've got a bunch of other faith neighbors here on Altar Row, and it was really cool to see coming up there. You're not alone in an isolated place. Your parking lots are in a religious dialogue.
Sure. I've been told that people who fly to Detroit and come down, they can actually see, as if the plane is close to landing, they can see this unique sight. The only thing that we lack here is a synagogue. A synagogue would have completed the Abrahamic faith in various manifestation of it. So that hopefully one day it will be established.
We're at the Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, Michigan, and today you can watch a live stream of this show on Facebook at WBEZ Worldview, and we're sharing this stream with the Islamic Center of America, and you can see it at their Facebook site as well. Well, what's it been like to grow so much? You've been here about 5 years, and a big congregation. There seems to be a lot of energy here. You've got a supple school program. You're able to do a lot of volunteer things. Can you give us a little idea of how the people move here?
Well, the bigger the size of the community, obviously creates more potential, and at the same time generates more challenges and that one has to deal with. The Islamic Center here, as you indicated, it's the biggest center, or if not the biggest, one of the biggest center in the United States. And most of the congregations tend to be from either Lebanese or descendant of Lebanese community. Recently, from 1990 onwards, we began to see exodus of the Iraqi community coming in, and then Yemenis community, then Syrians recently, Syrians immigrant are coming to United States, are settling around the area. So it creates its own unique atmosphere, and at the same time unique challenges. There are cultural differences between congregation and the community at large. So these are the issues that we have, as an Islamic center, we have to deal with.
I imagine there's a push and pull, a tug between, as there is in every faith organization, between people who want to be a little more traditional and people who want to move a little faster.
Sure. I mean, that is normal. I have talked to rabbis, ministers, and others. This is a challenge that every religious establishment faces. And we have to deal with them. It's not just how fast, but we should be prepared to respond by at least addressing some of the old issues and creating new narrative and new approach to it.
I'm sure a lot of people listening don't really know how mosques are organized, but you've got a board of directors. It's a very democratic kind of thing, lots of volunteers. Explain how that works.
Well, let me just add a comment. The mosques that we have in this area, at least for the Shia community, are divided into two groups. there are mosques that primarily relates to one religious individual who happened to be in charge of that mosque, and he appoints a few individuals to be the board of directors or the board of trustees, etc. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, this is the only mosque that does not belong to an individual. It's organically structured, that it has its own board of directors, board of trustees, that they are elected, and the religious, call it imam or religious scholar, works with the board of directors and board of trustees.
And that's got to be a good thing, right? I mean, that's got to help with the activity and vitality of volunteering and participating and getting people.
Sure, to a degree it does, but sometimes it has its own challenges when we begin to see differences of opinion developing on how to structure things.
I'll bet. I'm talking with Ibrahim Kazarouni. He's Imam for the Islamic Center of America. We're in Dearborn, Michigan. And I wanted to ask you a bit about your personal story. As you talked about the various immigrations that bolstered the mosque, you talked about Iraqis, and you have an amazing story yourself. You came from Iraq and came from a family there. To explain where you came from.
I don't think it's an amazing story, but it's a story. It's a story of my life, as they say. Originally, I'm from Iraq. My ancestors immigrated from Iran to Iraq about 120, 130 years ago. And from paternal side, they were born in Iraq, and I was born then was born in the holy city of Najaf in the southern part of Iraq. My paternal side of the family are mostly theologian, so I was destined, so to speak, to become a theologian. The political event changed in Iraq, and in 1974 I was imprisoned under Saddam's regime. After 5 or 6 months of torture and so on, they released me and I decided to leave Iraq. I traveled for a few years around Middle East to Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and Iran, and ultimately I realized that the situation was becoming too, how can I put it, hot to stay in that area. I decided to leave the Middle East, and I ended up in United Kingdom for a while. After United Kingdom, I came to United States for a while in Colorado, and about 5 years ago, I moved to Michigan.
That's a pretty incredible journey, and a journey that you share with many people in the mosque in some way or another.
I don't believe all of them know exactly the detail of this journey, but it's a journey.
I wanted to ask some about the symbolism of the mosque in the greater United States, because there are groups that are worried about Sharia in America, and the picture of this mosque is usually the one that kind of goes up on the screen, and there's protests occasionally here, people come. How do you digest all that and understand what it is? There's a lot of people here who are trying to make a life and be the best Americans they can, and there's all this going on.
See, this is one of the challenges of all minority communities when they come to a cosmopolitan society, multicultural, multifaceted. And the debate starts on their identity and their political participation, socioeconomic participation, etc., etc. So we are no different. How the general community reacts to our presence, I believe, has to be divided into two parts. Some of it is our responsibility to go out and explain and introduce ourselves and what we stand for, the values, etc., etc., and also work with the community on a greater scope of things, and for them to see, invite them in. I mean, this is part of that debate. Call it interfaith, whatever. But I hope this is not going to be the last time that we meet. It will be the beginning of a fruitful relationship. And so we have challenges as minority to go out and explain ourselves. and remove misconception and misunderstanding, whether it's about Sharia or our presence and relationship with others, as much as we hope others would respond to our own initiative, and hopefully a bridge will be built between the two communities.
Is it frustrating that the direction things have headed? You know, after 9/11, I had an imam on, and he said, you know, I am going to redouble my efforts to explain my faith to people. I don't care if it takes me 10 years. I am going to, you know, move the needle on this and get the job done. And my heart sank. I mean, when I really realized how long this is going to start, and now it's 19 years, and we're still explaining. Is there a better idea of a way to go about this?
Well, first of all, if you come up with an idea that is more successful than what we have done and we are doing, I believe I will be the first one to throw in the towel and look at your options. Those days, immediately after 9/11, I used to be in Colorado at the time. And we approached a number of churches, synagogues, and centers, and Islamic centers, to find out what is the best methodology or approach that we should take so that we don't have to go through it. And I thought after 14 or 15 years, we have made some headway into this until suddenly during the primary election, the same old narrative of Islamophobia and xenophobia and so on came to dictate. So it became an extra challenge. We are, people at least in this area, are fortunate in the sense that we have huge centers that they can come and stand shoulder to shoulder to prove to the rest of the community that, look, these issues can only be dealt with when both communities work together rather than purely the Muslim community or the other side.
Sheikh Ibrahim Kazarouni is Imam for the Islamic Center of America, and he's hosting us today as we take Worldview on the road. Thanks so much for hosting us, and it's been great to meet you, and let's continue the dialogue.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in.
This is Worldview on WBEZ. I'm Jerome McDonnell. We're on the road in Dearborn, Michigan at the Islamic Center for America. And we're going to talk now about families and Muslim American families in the area. And with me is Professor Christine Ajrouche, and she teaches sociology at Eastern Michigan University. She's done extensive research in the Muslim community here. She's also an adjunct at the University of Michigan. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I wonder if you could give us an overview of your work and what you've been doing and researching with Muslim families.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my research actually began almost 20 years ago on the topic of ethnic identity formation among children of Muslim immigrants. And not just Muslim immigrants, but Arab Muslim immigrants. And I was really focused on understanding how ethnicity was defined and experienced among these children of immigrants. And from that experience, I actually got very interested in the topic of aging, believe it or not, because one of the topics that would come up among the adolescent children of immigrants is they thought they were different from regular Americans because they would never put their parent in a nursing home. So there was this wide conceived notion that there's a big difference between Americans and Arabs, especially Muslim Arabs, because they wouldn't treat their elders in a negative fashion. Putting your parent in a nursing home was deemed as something very negative. So I became curious and wanted to understand more what the aging experience was like for Arab Americans and for Muslims in the Metro Detroit area, because I realized as a largely immigrant population, this was going to be the first generation to age, get old, grow older, in the Metro Detroit area. So I wanted to learn what the challenges were, what the strengths were, to help the community in the long run be able to address the challenges that would surely come their way.
What has happened there? Because did the challenges overcome the stigma about putting someone in a nursing home or facility?
You mean what has happened with that stigma?
Yeah.
It's still there.
I would say still rock solid.
Yes, it's very prevalent, and part of the problem, and I want to say that this stigma, it's interesting because my study participant said that, but I also teach at Eastern Michigan University, where the majority of my students are not Arab American or Muslim. And one of the things they say on the first day of class, I teach an aging and life course class, and one of the things they say is they think that wider American society is treating older people poorly, but they would never do that. They would never put their parent in a nursing home. So it's not a perspective that's unique to Arab Americans or Muslims. I think especially among young people, there's a perception that out there that's happening, but it's not going to happen with them. And part of the reason why that perception is there is because the media presents those kinds of stories when in reality only 5% of people age 65 and older are in a nursing home.
I know you're working on some research about Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And could you tell us about that and finding out about Alzheimer's in Muslim families?
Sure. I'd be very happy to tell you about that. Actually, I have 3 projects that I'm currently leading with colleagues at the University of Michigan around the topic. And the first one is a resource center called the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease, which we affectionately refer to as MCFAD for short. And what we do at that center is we organize community health learning events for the Arab American community, both Muslim and Christian, in the Metro Detroit area. Every other month we go to a specific venue and we bring information about Alzheimer's disease to the community as a way to promote understanding, address the stigma around Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and provide resources in terms of where to go to in case you need help. But a second goal of these events is also to promote the importance of research in the Arab American community and among Muslims, that we can't really understand the unique strengths and challenges of these communities unless they participate in research so that we know what the opinions, the values, the experiences are. So that's one project.
Now, do the challenges of Alzheimer's get people to change their ideas about getting help and getting people to facilities?
That's a great question. That's a great question. There's still a lot of misinformation about Alzheimer's, especially because the Arab American and Muslim communities are primarily immigrant and aging as the first generation. A lot of times losing one's memory or getting dementia is perceived to be normal, and so there's not a lot of effort to try to get help around that disease. And also there's the idea that if one does have the disease, it's embarrassing and they want to protect their family member, their older family member, from being out in public and being experienced or perceived as having memory loss. So there's a lot of stigma around it still, and that's one of the issues that we'd like to address with MCFAD, is to try to make a space for open dialogue, make a space for a safe space for people to talk about the challenges that they're having around Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And can I just say one other thing? The Arabic word for dementia is actually has an extremely negative connotation, which we've learned from our MCFAD events. So even just finding ways to talk about it without automatically turning people off or thinking that they don't want to have anything to do with it because it's just too much of a stigma.
Now, I know the census is involved in this somehow, and there's been some controversy about whether Middle Eastern should be in the census or not as a descriptive. And is that would that help with research to find out more about communities?
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest disappointments actually with this the next decennial census, is that the category of Middle Eastern and North African, which would have been one of the ways that we could identify Arab Americans in the census, is not going to be included. And that creates a big challenge for us because Arab Americans are legally considered white in the United States of America. So even though there may be Arab Americans in large data sets, they're hard to identify because there's not the descriptor for them in terms of their ethnicity.
Well, that seems like something that would be easily remediable. But I don't understand why that doesn't happen.
Well, that requires the approval of the Office of Management and Business, I think, in the U.S. government. Office of Management and Budget. And there's a lot of politics around it.
Yep.
So there's just a lot of challenges ahead of us. I mean, there's been an agitation for this kind of change for at least over 30 years now, and it just hasn't happened.
Do you find that as the generations assimilate, that you don't find changing attitudes on healthcare and nursing homes and things? Do people change their minds from assimilation?
That is I can't answer that question with research, but what I will say is through some of the studies that I've been involved in, what seems to be clear is that individuals who've gone through the act of having to care for someone who's had Alzheimer's disease and dementia oftentimes are pretty convinced that outside help is needed once they've been through it, not when they're in it, but they'll oftentimes tell their children, listen, if I ever get to that point, make sure you get help. Don't put it all on yourself. I don't want you to go through what I went through. So it seems to be that the experience is going to be the changing factor more than anything else.
What do you think people should know about Muslim American families? What is out there that is a misconception that you think people should get straightened out on?
About Muslim American families? Probably the notion, the thing that comes to my mind is the gendered stereotypes around Muslim families. There's this enormous perception, I think, among non-Muslims that somehow Muslim women are oppressed, more oppressed than any other women in the world, when the reality is that in most countries and most cultures of the world, we live in a patriarchal society. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim or not, women face very similar challenges. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have.
Well, it's fascinating to study what you're studying, and I congratulate you on your research, and I wish you great luck.
Thank you.
And I'm talking with Dr. Christine Ajrouche, and she is a professor of sociology, anthropology at Eastern Michigan University, and she's done extensive research on families in the Arab and Muslim community here in Dearborn. I am in Dearborn, Michigan, and we're having a great time at the Islamic Center of America, and we're going to stay with us. We're going to talk a bit about another aspect of Dearborn, Michigan. It's the hometown of Henry Ford, and a controversy surrounding an article describing Ford's anti-Semitism made national news earlier this year. After the break, we'll talk with the author. I'm Jerome McDonnell. You're listening to Worldview on WBEZ.
Discussion programming produced by WBEZ originates from the Stephen Edlis and Gail Neeson Foundation Talk Studio, supporting arts and communications outreach. And WBEZ is supported by the Springfield, Illinois Convention and Visitors Bureau. Visitors can get away to a place filled with history, attractions, winery and brewery trails, and culinary experiences. More at visitspringfieldillinois.com.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. President Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines has been cozying up to China despite China's encroachment in the South China Sea. Some experts are worried.
You give them an inch, they're going to go for the whole hand. And now they want us completely out of the South China Sea.
Our series on China's increasing influence in Asia. Next time, here in
1, 2, 3.
This
1, 2,
afternoon
3.
between 1 and 3 here at 91.5 FM WBEZ.
The White House has a new press secretary, Stephanie Grisham. She's known for working well with reporters while also hitting back hard in defense of those she's worked for.
I think she likes a challenge. I think she likes the chaos of it. And she's very good at kind of crisis management.
Now she takes on her biggest challenge yet. I'm Ari Shapiro. That story this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
That's All Things Considered this afternoon between 3 and 7. Or anytime using the WBEZ app.
We may see a passing shower or two this afternoon between 3 and 7. Otherwise, mostly sunny and hot. The high near 95 could feel as hot as 101. It's 91 now. Feels like 98 at 12:32.
This is Worldview on WBEZ. I'm Jerome McDonnell. We're on the road in Dearborn, Michigan. We'll be in Detroit tomorrow and Kalamazoo on Friday. You can follow the trip at wbez.org/WVBus. On social media, use the hashtag WVBus. And you can stream this program right now on Facebook. You could go to WBEZ Worldview and see the program on Facebook. One of the things you can't mistake about Dearborn is it's a Ford town. The birthplace of Henry Ford is home to the Ford World Headquarters. The Ford Integrated Factory, completed in 1928, is a National Historic Landmark. There's a Henry Ford Museum. There's the Henry Ford Centennial Library. Ford's personal estate is here. We're at the Islamic Center of America just off Ford Road. There is an Edsel Ford High School, a Ford Drive-In Theater. You get the picture. A controversy erupted earlier this year about an article in the Dearborn Historian that detailed Henry Ford's rather successful efforts to export his anti-Semitic beliefs. The article is entitled Henry Ford and the International Jew. The mayor of Dearborn tried to squelch the article. A furor ensued, and the article went viral and was widely read and reported on. Henry Ford and the International Jew is written by Bill McGraw. He worked at the Detroit Free Press for 32 years and is in the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. He's here with us now. Thanks for joining us, Bill McGraw.
Thank you for inviting me.
You know, I think a lot of people know that Henry Ford had anti-Semitic beliefs, and they're a little vague about the details. But in your article, you kind of go through exactly what was going on, and it is pretty astounding. You're focused a bit on the Dearborn Independent, which was something that he purchased 100 years ago. Explain the focus of your article.
Well, our magazine is called the Dearborn Historian. It's a quarterly, and it covers everything of historical interest in Dearborn. Excuse me. And so we knew that January 2019 was the 100th anniversary of Ford buying this newspaper. He bought it in 1919 when he was really almost peaking as a global celebrity after his successful car, the Model T, obviously. And so the point was exactly as you said. Most people, especially educated people, have an idea that Ford was anti-Semitic, had some anti-Semitic thoughts, but very, very few people know that Hitler, during his long struggle for power, had a portrait of Henry Ford sitting over his desk. So what I tried to do was bring research from all the various experts and historians who have written about Ford over the years, which everyday people don't read, academic books, and put it together in one story, and that's what we did.
And the publication, the Dearborn Independent, he had a lot of money and power, and he went right out and hired some of the top writers and journalists and people he could avail himself of in the Detroit area. He hired top people to write in this thing.
Detroit then was the fourth biggest city in the country, so there were 3 daily newspapers and lots of other media, and he rated the Detroit News for some of the best talent. And he was, and of course he didn't start his anti-Semitic campaign at first. He took the Dearborn Independent and tried to make it into, I think, what readers might remember, like something like the Saturday Evening Post. Only it wasn't very interesting, and they weren't doing well, and Ford had lost some money in his first year. And that's when they started brainstorming about which direction they could go to get readers. And they were urged to be sensationalistic about whatever they did, and they chose to go the anti-Semitic route.
Explain how many copies of this publication ended up getting out there, because it did take off, and there were a lot of them.
Of the Dearborn Independent
yeah.
You're talking about. Well, it wasn't so much the Dearborn Independent, because back in, of course, the 20s, the Dearborn Independent only circulated in the U.S. But what I think is extraordinary about what Ford did, and what is something most people aren't aware of, is that he took the content of his 92-week campaign, anti-Semitic campaign in the Dearborn Independent, and took that and put it into 4 books. And the books were entitled The International Jew. And those books were translated into more than a dozen languages. They particularly picked on Germany, thinking, I don't know why they picked Germany, but Germany was one of the locations where they concentrated the most. And and this would have been in the 20s now. This is long before Hitler came to power. But during the Nuremberg trials, some of the people who were on trial testified that they became interested in the Nazi ideology after they read, quote unquote, Mr. Ford's books.
And you point out that these are still available. They were never copyrighted, in a sense to keep them being distributed, and they are still distributed today.
just the opposite. Ford's people. Now remember, Ford Motor then was like the Microsoft or the Google of that era. He had some of the best people working in every phase, and his marketing was unbelievable. And so he used that kind of marketing to not only sell the independent, but to sell the International Jew, and to use that kind of savvy with the media to push their product, I guess is a way to put it.
I'm talking with Bill McGraw. He worked at the Detroit Free Press for 32 years, and his article in the Dearborn Historian ended up creating some controversy, and it was about Henry Ford and his anti-Semitic beliefs. And I wanted to talk about the controversy element of it now, because the mayor came out and kind of quashed the article in the Dearborn Historian. Can you explain what happened there?
Sure. When during the process of putting the issue together, and this was our biggest story, but was only one of several stories in that edition of the Historian, I was asked 2 or 3 times at meetings with the museum staff, what are you working on? And I told them I'm working on a 100th anniversary of Henry Ford buying the Dearborn Independent. I didn't go a lot farther. I waited for questions, and no one ever asked any questions. So they didn't see the final product until the printer delivered it to the museum. And as always, the curator took a few copies to City Hall and showed the mayor. And that's when there was some pushback that we heard the mayor isn't sure about this. He doesn't know if it's going to come out. And so to be honest, I didn't want it to be squelched. I wanted people to read it. So I gave the article in digital form to Deadline Detroit. It's a news website in the Detroit area, and that's where people can read this article, your listeners. And so that went up on Deadline Detroit. I don't remember which day, and that kind of started the furor. And that's when, after that appeared on Deadline Detroit, is when the mayor decided he was going to kill the whole issue. But by that time, it had been out in public and anybody could read it. And that's when, unfortunately for the mayor, I think I've said it many times, he's a good mayor. This was a very puzzling decision. And unfortunately, he paid for it with the media coverage of what happened.
Now, I thought he wrote a letter about why he decided to do what he did and squelch this thing. And I'll quote from it a little bit. He said, it was thought that by presenting information from 100 years ago that included hateful messages without a compelling reason directly linked to events in Dearborn today, this edition of the city-funded Historian would become a distraction from our continuing message of inclusion and respect. How does that work with you? What you think?
Well, I think one of the problems is today that people, especially white people in America, are undereducated about things having to do with race and things having to do with anti-Semitism. And so I think it's really important to go back, and even if you're in a local publication, to make what you're reporting out of that era, whatever you're reporting about in Dearborn, you're going to make it as truthful as possible, no matter how harsh that might seem, 100 years later. But I think that's important. And I think, I don't know if the mayor, if he would have it to do over again, if he would still issue that statement. But I think Dearborn could have used this, if they had wanted to, as a great learning experience. And it would have been a very positive experience for Dearborn. Unfortunately, what the mayor did reinforced some old stereotypes about Dearborn that I think are very untrue in this day and age. But nonetheless, they're out there.
Well, explain more about what you mean, because Dearborn has a long history of segregation. There was a segregationist mayor here for 32 years who did not allow African Americans to live in Dearborn, and he was there till 1978. There's been some rethinking about his statue that's downtown. I know you were involved in that. There's been other mayors who campaigned on the Arab problem in Dearborn. Can you say something about the kind of contextualization of these kinds of thoughts in Dearborn?
Well, for your listeners, Dearborn is obviously a suburb of Detroit. It's on the western side of Detroit and surrounded by Detroit on 3 sides. So it's a very long time, intimate relationship with Detroit, both people-wise and geography-wise. But in Ford Motor, back in the World War I era, before and after World War I, was employed a lot of African Americans, probably more than any company in America. Henry Ford was known in the black community in Detroit for that. But Dearborn, both back in that era and certainly in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when the mayor we spoke about, Orville Hubbard, he was mayor actually for, I believe, 40 or more years. He was a hardcore segregationist that would use racial slurs when he spoke about African Americans to the media even. So he didn't try and hide it. And he's been dead for a long time, but his statue sat 10 feet high next to City Hall for many years, passed every day, in fact, right across from the Arab American National Museum on Michigan Avenue. Dearborn has changed very much, obviously, over the years, not only with the Mideastern community, but it's becoming a much more integrated community racially, too, finally. So there was a lot of controversy about that statue, but gradually, and again, it was Mayor O'Reilly from Dearborn who, over about a 1.5-year period, they sort of de-emphasized the statue from being 10 feet high and being in a very prominent location to being just normal size and being a very obscure location.
And there's a plaque that talks about his segregationist policies by the statue.
And for many years, they had 3 or 4 plaques around the statue in its old location. And you would have thought he was Winston Churchill if you read the plaques. There was nothing to talk about what most people in Metro Detroit who remember him for, and that is his segregationist policies.
Dearborn, can the conversation about Henry Ford be, it's part of that sequence of events, really. And we were just talking with Imam Kazarouni, and he was saying, we are the latest other, and in the history of the United States, that people seem to always look for others, and this is kind of an American story right here.
It is a very American story, and Dearborn is, every town in America is a very American town, but Dearborn's had these chapters of, the hometown of Henry Ford, the Big Rouge plant, and all this, Ford being here for so many years has been an incredible positive for Dearborn, obviously, for the most part, but
and the Ford Corporation has been very good about all this for decades. I mean, since Henry Ford died, they have straightened things out.
The Jewish community has praised countless times Ford Motor, and especially when Henry Ford II was still alive and was running the company, for what he did. But even since he's been gone, his descendants have made Ford a real activist when it comes to supporting Jewish and even Israeli causes, and especially cultural causes.
And you've got a section in the Dearborn Historian where you talk about they help with documents. They helped with. They're very upfront.
Henry Ford spent a lot of time and energy documenting himself. His people did, I should say. And so Henry Ford, there's a Benson Ford Research Center at the Henry Ford Historical Complex in Dearborn, and it's not only a very good research center, but they'll work with you on controversial topics.
Well, it's been fascinating talking with you about this and talking about the history of Dearborn and the history of Henry Ford. Thanks very much for joining us, Bill McGraw. He's a veteran from the Detroit Free Press. He is in the Journalism Hall of Fame here in Michigan, and he wrote this article, Henry Ford and the International Jew in the Dearborn Historian, and you can read it online. And where is it again?
If anyone wants to Google Henry Ford and Deadline Detroit, I think they'll find it very easily.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, and congratulations on the discussion that has ensued.
Thank you very much.
I'm Jerome McDonnell, and you're listening to Worldview on WBEZ. We'll be back with more from Dearborn, Michigan, as we stay on the road here on Worldview. We'll be back in a moment. I'm Jerome McDonnell. You're listening to Worldview on WBEZ.
.47. Chicago modernism.
Hey,
a
hello.
Reading and discussion with beverage purveyors. Tickets at greencitymarket.org.
South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg faced backlash over a police shooting of a black man in his city. Can his plan to empower black Americans help win their support?
White America needs to face the roots of these inequities and the fact of systemic racism all around us. It's the air we breathe.
Buttigieg shares his opening arguments tomorrow on Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tomorrow morning between 5 and 9 a.m. or listen anytime at your convenience when you download the WBEZ app.
A passing shower is possible mainly between 3 and 7 today. Otherwise mostly sunny, hot and humid with a high near 95. It could feel as hot as 101. It's 91 now, feels like 98 degrees at 12:49.
This is Worldview on WBEZ. I'm Jerome McDonnell. We're on the road at the Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, Michigan, and you might hear the afternoon prayers that have started here at the mosque. You can follow the trip on our website at wbez.org/WVBus on social media. You can use hashtag WVBus, and we are on Facebook, streaming on Facebook at WBEZ Worldview today. We're going to talk now about an exhibit. It's actually a series of exhibitions that explores fact, fictions, and the imaginaries of the Muslim population in the Detroit and Southeast Michigan area. It's called Halal Metropolis. And with me now is Razi Jaffrey. He is a photographer and activist. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And Sally Howell is here. She is director of the University of Michigan Dearborn Center for Arab American Studies. Great to meet you, Sally.
Nice to meet you as well.
What you're doing with this exhibit is to kind of pull back the lens on the community and the perceptions of the community. Can you give us a thumbnail sketch of who is out there in the wider Muslim community here in Detroit? Sally, do you want to take a look at that?
Sure. The Muslim community here, as you've heard a little bit of, has been here for over 100 years. It's a very old community. You have families, again, that are second, third generation Muslim American. A lot of the early immigrants who came here came from Syria, what is today sort of Syria, Lebanon, that part of the Middle East. You also had, in the very early period, you had Bangladeshi and Turkish immigrants, people from the Balkans, Muslims who came. Most of these people came to work for the Ford Motor Company or the other automakers in Detroit in the early 20th century. The African American community also started converting to Islam in that early period of the 1920s and 30s. The Nation of Islam was founded here in Detroit in 1930. So you've got this really big dynamic population of Muslims who have been here for a long time. But in the 1960s, when our immigration laws changed, you also saw new groups of people coming. The fastest growing immigrant community in Southeast Michigan right now is coming from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, South Asians. Many of those populations are Muslims. We have African, especially West African immigrants who are moving to the area. And Dearborn itself, where we're sitting today, is really a product of all the immigration that started during the Lebanese Civil War and has just sort of continued in the all the way through the last century and into this new century, with new migrations coming, often that were sort of launched or set in place by civil conflict in places like Iraq, Syria, Yemen.
Razi, do you want to expand on that or contribute to that a little bit?
I think one of the important things that I always want to stress to people when talking about Muslims in America, it's very difficult to say Muslims believe this or Muslims believe that, because Islam is the most ethnically diverse religious community in America. And Muslims are represented in the United States by people from all different backgrounds. And so it makes it really challenging then to talk about what Muslims believe, because it depends on which Muslims you're talking about. So that's the other thing I think I would add to that, yeah.
It's also really exciting. Whenever I go to a pan-Muslim event and I see all the different people there, it's great. It's like the United Nations just dropped down on the conference center.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a photographer, I always joke with people like, I feel like I have a passport, that allows me to access all these different communities, because I'm constantly working in different communities of different backgrounds, and I'm learning new things about the faith, both in practice and in culture, that I never knew before.
How do you begin to wedge this into a exhibition? you're a photographer, but there's more than just photography in this. You're kind of doing a lot of things.
So the exhibit that we're working on is called Halal Metropolis, and it examines Muslim visibility in Southeast Michigan. What that means is how Muslims create visibility for themselves, how they become visible in the public space, and how often non-Muslims create that visibility, or how they accommodate Muslims in the public space or through commerce. We're also looking at elements of Muslim life through design, architecture, culture, and music. So for me as a visual artist, it has to do with capturing that through photography, film, audio recordings. And then we've invited Muslim artists from the area as well to contribute work and to meditate or contemplate the idea of visibility and what it means to them. So that also comes through their work that they're submitting. Through textiles, through video installations, through sculptural work, but we're also planning a series of panels and performances as well.
Sally, do you have a favorite piece in the exhibit or things that you think people should hear about?
Well, I think of my favorite piece. So the exhibit, as it moves from space to space, each time we install it, it's going to reflect the specific history of the Muslim community in that space and the specific ways in which the Muslim community in that space is visible. Right now we're showing in Detroit, right on the same block with the Muslim Center of Detroit, which is the city's oldest African-American mosque. So we're really concentrating on their history and the ways in which they're shaping that space, both past and present. And my favorite thing in the installation right now are these portraits that Razi did on the Eid, the end of the month of Ramadan. There's a big holiday, and at the Muslim Center of Detroit, people from all over the city come to worship there for the holiday, to do their holiday prayer. And in this particular community, they dress up in their very finest clothes. And so their clothes, some people are dressing up and, they look like they could be going to church on Sunday, on Easter Sunday. Other people look like they're, coming straight from Africa. People just dress in this whole variety of costumes, and they're very proud, and families will dress up all resembling one another, sort of wearing matching clothing, and it's just beautiful. And the portraits that Razi took of this were fantastic. He was also here. He was here at the Islamic Center of America taking portraits too on the same day, and we're going to continue this sort of portraiture during the holidays. And so by the end of the exhibition, we'll have a display of this diversity that we're talking about.
I was struck by some of the photography that was about commercial, I don't know what to call it, acceptance or commercial products that were gearing themselves towards the Muslim community. It seems to be something you look at too, Razi.
Yeah, when I'm explaining the project, I'll often mention a couple of examples of this, and one of my favorite ones is when you walk into Whole Foods during Ramadan or Eid, they'll have signage marketing and saying, slogans like "Get ready for Ramadan," "Stock up on your Ramadan goods," And you see this in Myers, Kroger's, Home Depot has signs in Arabic. Target as well has Eid and Ramadan gift cards that you can buy today. Macy's as well, and they have a hijab line that they carry in their stores, in some of their stores, and so it's really remarkable to see that. And the way that we've defined what a halal metropolis is, it's a place in which Muslims can live freely as Muslims and contribute to that society with all of their, contribute to that community with all of their talents, and become visible in that community. And so what we see here in Metro Detroit is that it is quintessentially a halal metropolis.
Now, one of the interesting things you're doing with the exhibit, and you're going to be moving it around for 2-3 years now, you're going to take it to places where the Muslim community is not visible. What will happen there?
Well, our intention is to help people think about the fact that even though Muslims aren't necessarily visible, that doesn't mean they're not there. So, for example, when we go to Macomb County, the Muslim community has been in Macomb County since the city started expanding, the suburbs were being created there. Very often in those spaces, you see Muslims become visible. You read about them in the newspaper and things like this. When people are opposed to their presence in the city, when people try to organize a mosque or something like that, and people come out in opposition to them. So what we're trying to do is just sort of lay the groundwork and sort of say, okay, this community's been here for a long time. Talk about who they are in that community, and talk about the ways in which Muslims have transformed these other landscapes, supporting the economy of the region, supporting the cultural efflorescence of the region, and sort of helping that community think through what this new Muslim visibility in their environment will mean.
If people want more information and want to check out some of the photographs from Halal Metropolis, where do they go?
We have a website, halalmetropolis.org, and you can find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all at the handle at halalmetropolis.
Razi Jaffrey is a photographer and activist behind Halal Metropolis, and Sally Howell is director of the University of Michigan Dearborn's Center for Arab American Studies. Thanks for joining me and talking about your exhibit and the community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
I want to thank a few people here, and it has been great to be here. Really enjoyed it, and really welcoming community here. Thank you, Dr. Sheikh Dr. Ibrahim Kazarouni, Imam for the Islamic Center of America, for hosting us here in Dearborn. A huge thanks to Donna Jawad from the Islamic Center of America for help and hospitality. And thanks to Mervet Kadu and Mohammed Bondar for dinner last night. You are the definition of welcoming people, and really enjoyed the community here. One of the first things that Chicago's new mayor did when she came into office was to put an end to water shutoffs. Tomorrow on Worldview, we're going to stay on the road and to be in Detroit, Michigan, and we'll take a look at the highly controversial practice of water shutoffs in Detroit. Don't forget, you can follow us on our road trip at wbez.org/WVBus. We are on social media at #WVBus. Worldview is produced by Steve Bynum and Julian Haida. Production assistants are Ashish Valentine and Jenny Friedland. J. Kyle White Sullivan is our engineer on the trip. Hope you can join us tomorrow. I'm Jerome McDonnell, and you've been listening to Worldview on WBEZ.
Yes, Worldview returns tomorrow.
Yay!
From the Great Lakes region of Michigan. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's Here and Now. Partly cloudy, 91 degrees right now. And we'll get the latest news from the WBEZ newsroom as well as from NPR News in Washington coming up next.
Hey there, this is Stephen Dubner from Freakonomics Radio. We'll be teaming up with WBEZ for a podcast passport event right here in Chicago on Thursday, September 26th at the Harris Theater. For tickets, go to wbez.org/events. See you then.